there's this kind of jarring grief process that I've seen in people. You're grieving the idea of what they could be, of this curated version of who they are, before you've even interacted face to face.
Welcome to LoveLink, your guide to relationships in all forms. I'm your host, Dr. Simone Humphrey. So joining us today, we have the Modern Mind team, and we're going to be discussing dating in New York City. So happy to be talking about this with you, Lydia, Yaron, and Tess.
Likewise. So glad to be here.
So to start us off, I'm wondering, what's dating in New York City like?
It's funny because I think, we're different ages, different experiences, different answers. But I think we can all agree it can be really challenging. Dating in New York City, maybe dating everywhere in the world is just really, really challenging. It feels like a game of musical chairs with no chairs sometimes, and then it can also be incredible. And obviously, like, it's one of the reasons that people come to New York is because it is such a collection spot for so many interesting, vibrant, bright, ambitious, beautiful people that are looking to do something with their lives. And so dating here can be really, really exciting, but it can also be, challenging, I think, from my perspective, for sure.
Mm-hmm. I love that musical chairs reference, Yaron. I think it's so much of almost an issue of volume sometimes. It's overwhelming for some people, and for those same exact people a week later, it can be exhilarating because of how many options there are, both in terms of people, activities, places to go, different environments. So it's really hard to grasp the volume. But once you get in the flow, I think there are really specific ways that certain people tend to find their footing in that environment.
Yeah. And just to refine it, there's this conundrum that, when you said the word volume, it really spoke to me. This conundrum that exists, especially for my female clients and friends of mine that are women, where they'll get on a dating website and they're inundated, they're overwhelmed by the amount of responses. And yet at the same time, they never seems to be someone appropriate to date. And I think that contradiction, is really I don't know, that paradox is the one that I would, that feels like it's really defining at the moment,
Yeah, I completely agree with both of your points. I think it's very energetic in a way that can be almost paralyzing at times, but also really fun and dynamic. And you get to meet so many different interesting people. I think one thing about dating in New York that I've loved is so many people are transplants. So you meet people from so many different walks of life. There's a lack of shared history usually that I find really, really interesting. It's just fun to get to know someone and hear about, where they grew up and what their family dynamics were. There's just a lot of rich content that you wouldn't necessarily have if you were dating in your hometown or, when you grew up around that person or had some kind of proximity to them.
Mm-hmm. And that almost makes finding someone who has similarities to you that much more special as well. It's kind of the land of opposites attract, but then once you find that common ground, there's this aha light bulb moment that I find that people really want to hold on to once they find that.
Yeah, I think that's... Go ahead, Sophie.
Yeah, it's so interesting because as I'm hearing you talk about dating in New York City, it's it really captures just New York City. There's an intensity to it. There's these highs, there's these lows. There's so much to do. There's so much opportunity. But the flip side of the coin is, the paradox of choice or feeling overwhelmed or difficulty committing. And I think this is probably true for a lot of different things, whether it's career or activities or feeling this sort of well-being of life. What would you say are the biggest, we've touched on some of the challenges, but what makes New York City dating really hard? What have you noticed either in your own experiences or with your clients? Are there certain particular themes that you notice really emerging?
There's a sort of flightiness that I've seen both in my own life and in a lot of my clients' experiences where, because there are so many options, there's a lot of kind of indecisiveness. So that kind of early stage of dating tends to last longer than what I've seen in kind of more suburban areas, because you're getting to know more people at once, or you're seeing a lot more types of relationships, a lot more different dynamics. And so I think it kind of takes a little bit longer for people to say, okay, I'm going to decide not to open my door up to all of these options, and I'm going to commit to this one person or to whatever type of dynamic your relationship has. That commitment aspect seems to take a little bit longer here than in smaller communities, I've found.
Yeah, I think that's right. And also to touch back to touch on the transplant idea. I was born in Israel, grew up in Kenya, came here, and part of what I love about this city more than any other city, it really is truly cosmopolitan. I've always gotten better along with people that are kind of on the periphery of their culture, as opposed to right in the center, in the center of it. But at the same time, there's something about New York that attracts the kind of people that make it a self-fulfilling prophecy that they might have a hard time settling down or like making a certain kind of decision, because they're here to like accomplish so many things, and settling down and maybe entering a long-term relationship. It's not that it's not a priority, not that it's not important. It's just competing with so many other interests. And so when you have that barrel filled with those types of personalities that are coming in from everywhere, that are looking to climb whatever pyramid they're climbing or achieve whatever they're looking to achieve, you can make connections very easily, but you can also lose them very easily, or people can feel replaceable,
That idea of competition was kind of like a light bulb for me around just this idea that you're not just competing with other people on the dating market, you're competing with the professional life, the personal life, activities, hobbies. There's so much more, again, with the volume of it, that you're competing with beyond just other individuals.
I think that is a real challenge for a lot of New Yorkers, is that they're so ambitious, right? To like sustain yourself in the city, you have to just be making a high earning income. You're competing with the best of the best. And so people are very focused on their career. And I think even though, what I've seen is a lot of very well-intentioned, successful people who are saying, dating is my priority. This is my value. This is what I want in life. And they cannot make time for it. And so just carving out time that actually where your values match your behaviors is really difficult for New Yorkers, especially when to have a successful career takes a lot of work and investment and time.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I think that's, that manifests itself in the kind of behavior that like feels inexplicable sometimes on dating websites, and a lot of like, I've got clients who come in and talk to me about like the ghosting phenomena and this what's happened also in terms of the digital kind of like market or the digital, dating economy is that people relationships or the early days of the relationships feels fungible. It feels like, like you could just pick something and drop something. And so when it's competing with the fact that you travel a lot, the fact that you work, the fact that you're, you have friends, the fact that you're, maybe you've been through a couple of like not so great relationships. And so there's a little bit more, it just the kind of the perimeter around your heart kind of sort of feels like expands. And then the time and the energy that it requires to actually make a lasting commitment becomes greater. And people drop people off in the middle of a conversation, or people just, they make a date and don't show up, or they do. And so there's a lot of behavior that feels really confusing and perplexing and reinforces how difficult it can be, to date in this new, not just New York, but just like the new social media reality that we're all contending with,
What do you think the impact of that kind of ways of communicating, the ghosting, the dropping of conversations, the anonymity of it all on digital dating apps has on people? Like, how has it affected the way people feel about themselves and maybe how they date?
Something that I hear from client after client after client is, I feel so alone. I'm so lonely. I see all of these people in my life. I see all of these people at bars, on the streets, looking so coupled up, and I want that so badly. And then I go home and I'm ghosted by 5 people I was talking to on the dating app. Or I was seeing someone and they dropped off, and it's just part of this cycle and this notion of loneliness when you're surrounded by thousands of people. is something that I see really keep people stuck, because it really represents that deep longing in my interpretation, and then the kind of disconnect between that longing and what your actual experience is when you're trying to put yourself out there. So we see these kind of cyclical flows of, I go all in, I get ghosted by a few people, I stop for a few months, and then I go all in all over again. And it's like this wound tending to the wound, wound tending to the wound is something I've seen.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar. I think there's like a pace setting dilemma around dating apps, maybe specifically, where it does seem to be very black and white of like, I'm putting a lot of energy into this. I'm going to go on 5 dates a week, and people like really maximize that experience. And then if it doesn't play out the way that they maybe envisioned, there's a real tendency to kind of retreat, recover, recuperate, like cleanse your soul almost, because it is, I think, a burden to your spirit sometimes to like put yourself out there in that way and then not have it, come to fruition. So I think, there's something to be said maybe for figuring out the sort of balance of how to do something slowly, consistently, and in a way that feels manageable to kind of continue without that intensity followed by like total isolation.
It's so easy to burn out on dating apps. I think just like this constant feeling of rejection, and it's so easy to focus in on all the ways that you're being rejected. Of course, probably you're rejecting other people. There's just as many times as you have lost a conversation with someone, you've probably dropped a conversation, because that's just the norm and standard. But yeah, how do you protect yourself against burning out? And one thought I had, and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts, is like, you have to really love yourself up in this process, because if you don't, dating apps will destroy your sense of self-esteem. And then if you continue to, I think dating apps are kind of engineered to prey on insecurity. And so it's so easy to feel this panic and desperation and this kind of longing for a partner. And then that can interfere with the way that you communicate with others, maybe your choice of dates, choosing to stick with someone longer than is appropriate. So that piece around like, you have to really take care of yourself, because you're in such a vulnerable place when you're dating on apps and in New York City. Probably dating apps everywhere, because this is kind of more universal, but I think particularly in New York.
Yeah, no, I think it's a real gauntlet, no question. And I think one of the pieces of advice or kind of insight that I have for my clients that are struggling with it, and this is really just for that first part, it's not for the whole thing, but that first part can be significant, which is the whole digital aspect. When you're on the dating apps, until you meet someone in real life, they're not real. And so all of the communication, everything that happens, again, that's not licensed to behave poorly or anything like that, but simply to have some kind of distance between the engagement, which can sometimes feel hyper real. I've got clients who've like gone on month-long, Facebook or Instagram relationships that then kind of like imploded, when they either didn't meet or did meet, the person, and they ended up not being what they expected. So I think, a big part of it is to engage, to treat that digital part differently from IRL, from the real world, and to protect get a sense of distance from your emotions, and both good and bad, not to become overly attached, the sort of that pen pal phenomena. And you see that on dating sites a lot. You see a lot of people saying, I'm not here for a pen pal. There's a reason it's being said, because a lot of times, relationships are far generated at that level. And a lot of people have been led down this path for a week or a month. And then, either it never materialized or it's a huge disappointment. So it's really to keep that first part, which is critical, contained and at its proper proportion, and not to take things too hard until you meet someone. And obviously then there's a whole other set of challenges. But I feel like oftentimes people they treat the digital and the real interchangeably, and they really should be different protocols almost for the two,
Yeah, I think the curation aspect is so important to keep in mind. We're all putting this tiny curated version of how we want to be viewed on this sliding screen that disappears all of a sudden. And there's this thing that I hear from some of my clients and some of my friends where you see someone match with someone, and before they've even met in person, like you said, they've created the hopes and dreams of what this person could be to them. So when you get ghosted at that stage, there's this kind of jarring grief process that I've seen in people. You're grieving the idea of someone, of what they could be, of this curated version of who they are, before you've even interacted face to face. And I think I totally agree with you, Euron, like getting ahead and really holding the confidence that I'm not going to chat for too long, or I'm going to be really clear from the get-go. You know, I don't like to have long conversation over the app. Let's schedule something and get to the details when we're there. And it kind of it gets ahead of the kind of idealized version of that person. And it kind of softens that retreat and recover process a little bit as well, if it doesn't go well.
Yeah, that really resonates. I think I've certainly experienced that myself when I was starting to date on the dating apps, and then with friends and clients alike, where there's this idea of, you know, okay, I'm open to getting on the apps, but before I do that, I'd love to have X, Y, and Z in place, whether that be, you know, a job that you're proud of, or, you know, a good group of friends that you feel like you can sort of like present as having to that person. So there's, again, yeah, this idea of kind of curating and having things in order before you really get out into the dating world. And, you know, I think that's understandable on one level. And then it's also somewhat dangerous because there's not a lot of spontaneity there, or like flexibility, freedom to just really have these like organic moments with someone, and to meet people when you're not in like a quote unquote great place. Like I think something really wonderful can also come from meeting someone when you're in a challenging time and like don't have everything in order. So that just seems to be less common if you're using the apps, but I'm generalizing obviously. But yeah, I think there's this real, like, what is the version of me that I feel comfortable putting out there in a very open, vulnerable way.
Can I ask a question of all of you? Because I obviously have my perspective, and a lot of the times I'm talking to patients or friends of mine, they're male. I'm just wondering what is it like for a woman on a dating app, just in general? I know it's a broad question, but I'm curious because there seems to be I think there's really a big disconnect between the male and the female experience on apps.
I think my first reaction there is to go to the extreme and just make the really clear point that women are thinking about our physical safety when you're going out on a first date with someone from a dating app. And that's like really the first line that you are seeking when you're looking at someone's profile and thinking about going out on this date is, okay, I'm going to share my location with 3 of my closest friends sometimes, or I'm going to make sure I'm close to multiple places that I know. And I think that it does show up when you're meeting someone in real life, of course. But there's something that's kind of puts us on our heels that I think we show up in a slightly different headspace because of that fear.
Yeah, this whole other layer of anxiety that I think probably most men don't experience when they're going on a first date. And unfortunately, when we think about dating and we think about kind of freedom and feeling ourselves and wanting to feel comfortable, when there's not that level of safety, it can be very difficult to kind of access that more spontaneous and free-spirited part of ourselves.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think even when you asked that question, I just took a huge deep breath because it's this like, I don't know, for me, when I was first on the apps, it felt like I was just inhaling, and then finally I exhaled. I don't know. It just felt kind of intense. And like, yeah, you really have to be so intentional about protocol and making sure that you have systems in place that guarantee, or at least close to guarantee, your safety. So yeah, it takes away some of that freedom and flexibility that maybe you would have if you were in a small town and you had a network around you that could kind of vet someone, right? That's the layer that you don't have as much in New York. So that's beautiful in a way, but it's also, I think, a shortfall, maybe, you know, for a particular subset of people that have concerns around safety.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. I think that's what the dating apps and social media has done is it's put all of us up in this virtual room together, but there's no degrees of separate. There's no 3 degrees of separation here. So some of the usual biological evolutionary kind of systems for like vetting and checking and reducing the cortisol, that fear response, are not there. And so there's definitely this sort of like, I don't know, axe murderer kind of like line that you have to cross as a man, because the point of assumption is like, and I completely understand that the male privilege doesn't need like is a huge blind spot. Like that's absolutely right. Like no, most men, I would say, I don't know, maybe all men don't. That's not the first thing that they think about at all, not even remotely, but so it makes it makes a different dynamic for sure.
I also have this sense, and I don't know this based on data, but I have this sense that it's a lot more difficult for women to date than men, which is not to say that it's not hard for men to date in New York City, but I think statistically, we know that there are more women than men. So there's just a little more of a demand for men and a surplus of women. And also, I think women, just like thinking about my clients, thinking about my peers, like there's more of a reality on a biological clock if you want to have a child, right? For men, you've got a little longer to think about it. There is also this real value of youth and appearance. There's a lot more pressure on a woman. So as she gets older, her quote unquote value in society goes down. Whereas for men, that kind of plateau is not as steep, going back down again. And women in the city are more educated than men in the city, and that disparity is getting larger. And women who are educated tend to want men who are educated. So they're working with a lot smaller of a selection pool. And maybe that means that women need to be more flexible on certain criteria. That's possibly true. But I also think there is a lot of women who are ready to date and commit and find a partner and start a family. And there's a lot of men who have more of a luxury of taking their time, of feeling like they have more selection because there's just more women. And so I think a lot of women experience this sense of they've started going on dates with men and the man is just not ready to commit. And I'm talking just about straight relationships. And so I feel like I'm often hearing this frustration actually towards men on the women's side of feeling like, there's not a lot of men that I not only that I can choose from, but that also are ready to commit and be in a long-term relationship. So I think that's a real challenge for women. And of course, I think men struggle and also have a hard time finding a female partner. And if they're ready to commit, there's the same kind of dating app challenges around communication and feeling dropped. But I do think the experience is different between men and women.
I want to just note, I'm not sure where this falls in our conversation, but that's something you're saying there, Simone, is making me think about how, women are not so gradually shifting out of this traditional framework of I'm ready for a relationship, therefore I want children, I want to get married, I want to move to the suburbs, whatever that kind of image of what we used to believe was baseline for these relationships, especially in your 20s and 30s when you're starting to really enter this world. And I think seeing myself included, who I don't know if I want to have kids, and that's something that I find comes up on the first date. And there's this assumption that everyone is going in the same place if they're there. It's just so not black and white anymore. We're not all going in the same direction. And because of that, I'm finding these conversations are happening earlier. And they really set the tone for this early dating phase where you literally are meeting this person for the first time and they're asking, what are your intentions? And as incredible as it is to have these conversations early, it's adding a new aspect that I find really interesting.
Yeah, it's almost like you're getting down to business faster. Like you're getting to kind of be able to find your right partner quicker on some level. But then there also might be these premature filters. It's like for some people, they might say, yeah, if a person's not willing to stay in New York, it's over. Like that's a deal breaker. And yet you sort of lose this opportunity of kind of evolving. You find this person that maybe is really a good fit. You really share similar values. it's a good partnership, and then you're open to being more flexible later on.
Yeah, maybe when someone like checks all of your boxes, you then are more prone to really like latching on to something because look, this is everything that I've been looking for, but maybe the emotional connection isn't as strong, or you know what I mean? Like maybe you kind of become biased in that way if they do or don't meet your qualifications, really.
And it's so easy to think, oh, if you don't meet my qualifications, I might as well just go to the next person because this city has endless supply. So the criteria become a little more rigid.
Right. So then that's probably this pace that's adding to the pace of, okay, nope, now to the next, nope, now to the next. And it's somehow reminding me of what you were talking about before, Lydia, with this. I want to have everything set exactly how I need it to be before I create this profile. And it reminds me of this idea that kind of drives me crazy. I don't know about you guys, that you have to be healed to enter a healthy relationship. When so much of our work is that you can actually heal your attachment wounds through a new secure attachment. And so, yeah, there's just so many questions around.
It's not clean. It's not clean at all. And the idea that you have to be healed or pure or whatever, ready, like before you enter another relationship, I think is problematic. The other thing I've also noticed, and I don't have any data on this, this is just a feeling and intuition based on my experience, the experience of my clients, is that like, again, with social media, and the dating apps and kind of the world just in general, at least in these sort of the hubs that we're in New York, they're kind of tailor-made to a more individual, I don't want to say solipsistic experience. Like I think a lot of people make the noises about wanting to date, but don't want to do the work or take the energy. There's a disconnect between what people say they want and how they actually behave. And I think a lot more people are fine with going it alone, or at least they're low key not fine with being alone, but they're not willing to do the energetic work, the discomfort, the compromise, all of the stuff, because dating and being in a relationship and changing, the economics of it. I mean, it requires it requires a real reconfiguration, real energy. And I find that a lot of people are, they're looking for someone, but they're not maybe as willing to do the work. And the world is more and more and more tailor-made for that experience, like you can have a virtual life today much more easily. You can be invested in your friends and, in relationships and other things without actually participating in them, more than ever, and I don't know. I mean, it's just
but this is why we have an epidemic of loneliness in our country too. High rates of depression and anxiety. It's easier to avoid something that's uncomfortable, that might be vulnerable, but the cost is that actually you can be very isolated and lonely.
Right. And we have the technology to make that isolation and loneliness feel less, on the surface of it, painful, but the long-term consequences are that like you're feeding your immediate dopamine requirements, like you're getting your hit of whatever, your virtual relationship, your virtual holiday, your virtual friendship on Instagram without doing the work, without being out there. But there are long-term consequences for sure.
And I'm actually finding that dynamic is leading to an increase of confusion and shame around the experience of loneliness. I'm hearing clients come in and say, I might not have done anything, but I FaceTimed, I sent 100 memes to my best friends. I'm in all of these group chats, I'm Snapchatting, whatever it might be. So I was interacting with people. I don't know why I feel this way. I'm in touch with people, but we're not necessarily active participants in our communities physically around us. And that degree of connection is what kind of feeds our relationships and minimizes the loneliness experience.
Hi, LoveLink listeners. Our group practice, Modern Mind, is located in New York City with offices in Brooklyn and Manhattan, offering in-person and virtual psychotherapy. We provide individual, couples, and group therapy, as well as ketamine-assisted psychotherapy in conjunction with a psychiatry prescriber. Therapy is a powerful experience that can transform your life and help you live it to its full potential. We're here to help take you where you want to go. To find out more about our practice, visit www.modernmind.co or email info@modernmind.co to be connected with one of our therapists. So is it possible to meet people organically in this dating app culture and in New York City?
I mean, the short answer is yes. Of course it is. I don't think that COVID helped the situation, that's for sure. But I think that, right, I mean, I think that absolutely you can do it. And people still, I've heard stories of people meeting in the wild. It happens for sure.
What recommendations do you have for people to meet people organically? You know, I think so many people get so burnt out and need breaks or need to just stop using the apps for a while. How do you suggest people meet people in the wild? Where do you see success in that?
I think investing in yourself and your own hobbies. If you're putting yourself in environments and communities that you genuinely want to be in, like if you're a creative going to art classes, if you're an athlete signing up for an intramural team, signing up for a run club, whatever it might be, and doing these things because you genuinely want to be there, that's how you build these connections based on, something you're experiencing, rather than saying, I'm going to go to a bar every night. People are also drinking much less than they used to in the city. So bars aren't necessarily popular third spaces for meeting people anymore.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I've actually had some clients that I've worked with about, towards, sort of coupling their passions with, social activities. So Run Club I feel like there was an article a few months ago about like how Run Club is basically a hookup, it's hookup club.
Yeah.
I mean, people are just going on these run club, which is wonderful because I'm a big proponent. I think you make much better decisions running than you do drinking, so I think that part of like this, I mean, I understand why alcohol is a social lubricant and why it kind of makes things easier and certainly puts down your defenses, and people can make perfectly good decisions drinking, in a dark bar somewhere. But like, I think that's absolutely like rock climbing, run clubs, pickleball that's taken over every every children's park in the last few years. Because a lot of people now have work that isn't necessarily super office based, or it's kind of a hybrid. And so the opportunity to meet people in the work environment is less. And it's also kind of fraught. People have started, I think people have a more complicated relationship to work relationships now, so I think clubs that's a really excellent avenue for meeting people.
Yeah, I agree with all of this. I also am thinking about really leaning on your community, whether that be friends or neighbors, family members, whoever it may be, but like people that you trust and have a good time with and can really sort of, communicate about what you're looking for from a partner, and also like what kind of relationship you might be up for, right? Some people really just want to date to kind of strengthen that muscle and keep up their, social skills in that way, because I do think dating is a particular subset of social skills. So, it doesn't always have to be, I'm looking for my lifelong partner, but just like letting the people that you love and care about support you in that way. And you never know, who knows someone who, is also looking for something similar. So I think being open and honest about your intentions with people that you know already is a great resource. And yeah, I'm also just generally thinking as a sort of aside about this idea of tolerance, because I think we forget now with the apps and this idea of being able to kind of curate our experience, that dating is risky and it gets messy. And I think a lot of like that growth that you maybe are trying to do on the front end before you put yourself out there is maybe just that, like being able to build your tolerance that, someone could hurt you, someone could let you down. There's a lot of room for disappointment and someone making you nervous or, whatever the things are that you maybe feel hypersensitive to, like really building out your toolkit and resources to be able to manage those things on some level. Obviously, no one wants to get hurt, but I think about it, in the context of couples therapy, because that's always something that I kind of bring into the room is like, are you able to tolerate in this moment that you have the ability to hurt each other, right? That your words can affect someone else in this way, someone that you already love. And that's even hard, right? When people are already in a committed relationship. So if we're scaling it way, way back and you barely know someone, it's really hard to accept that you're going into a quote unquote risky situation. So, and I'm speaking, separate from physical safety. That's a separate concern. But yeah, I don't know. Does that make sense? I think it's got to be, like you said, Yaron, it's not clean.
I think it's such a good point, Lydia. And also that if you put so much energy into trying to protect yourself from getting hurt, then you're not going to take the risk to finding someone. And that ultimately is leaving you in a different kind of pain, the pain of not being able to get what you want. And so, right, the first piece around just accepting that you're going to experience pain is part of the process. I also think it's really important, so many people when they're single, some people are happy and they're not looking for a relationship. And this is not necessarily catered towards those people, because if you don't want a relationship and you're single, then that's great. You're kind of where you need to be. But I think for people who want to be in a relationship and aren't, there's this real suffering that can happen. And part of that is absolutely painful. And part of, I think, this piece around wanting something, but also really trying to make the best of your life in the present. And this is also, I think, in line with following the activities that you just naturally and organically love doing. And maybe you'll find someone in that process, but also how do you enjoy your life as a single person and live a robust life, because your life is going to pass you by, and still actively try to find a partner and being able to kind of hold both of those at the same time.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. This isn't life isn't a dress rehearsal. It doesn't start when you're in a couple. It doesn't end when you're single, right? You're just, you have to be present and as fully actualized in whatever stage you're in, because definitely the desire to be in a couple or to be dating or to finally have that, especially if you've been single for a while, it can be overwhelming. It can destabilize you, right? So everything becomes about that. Everything's filtered through that. And aside from the fact that, it somehow seems to just kind of by universal karma make things more challenging if that's the way you feel. It's just a painful place to be in. But it's something that, I hear a lot, And so, yeah, it's very important to try to find that balance, to be as present and really just and enjoy whatever it is that you're doing as fully as possible, and hope that you can bring someone else into the equation, as opposed to redirecting all of your energy and all of your focus onto that thing, as if that once that missing piece is there, then all your problems have been solved. And
relationships,
as couples therapists, we know that's not the case.
Relationships are so idealized. Newsflash, being in a relationship doesn't necessarily make you happier at all.
No.
And we know this because
we know this firsthand.
Yes.
Yes. See it every day. And it's that idea that, once I meet someone, I'll know, because I won't feel lonely anymore. I won't feel sad anymore. All of these issues will dissipate somehow. And it puts so much pressure on this future hypothetical being, because nobody can be all of one thing. Everything for one person, right? Everybody has to do that work to figure out, what can you bring into my life, rather than, are you going to solve everything in my life by being here?
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, right. If you're looking to another person to fill these deeper needs, that is such a setup for success, that you need to really fill up your deep needs, whether that's emotional needs or physical needs or just daily life needs, and then find a partner after that. Being able to really find someone that you want, not someone that you need.
And if you have all of these things that you want to work through, really being able to name those things for yourself, but also in the early days of dating someone, to be able to say, here's what I'm working with. You know, how can we work together through these experiences? Are you down for that in the first place? And putting it on the line rather than saying, you know, I'm going to go 6 months. I'm going to hope that all of these scary feelings disappear when we start dating. And then 6 months to a year in saying, oh, so here's this issue that I have that I need you to help me solve. It's kind of like pulling the curtain back during halftime or something.
How can people set themselves up well for a first date? Like in terms of maybe setting the environment up well for you, addressing whatever first date jitters you have, maybe the mentality that you should approach a first date with. You guys have any advice?
Well, I have a few practical tips, which I know that not everyone agrees with, but I still think they're like a good, at least, you know, it's a good rule of thumb for the most part. I think that it's for a first date, especially, it's good to do it without alcohol involved. It's good to do it with a relatively low threshold of commitment. So like, you know, big romantic dinners when you haven't met the person and dimly lit atmospheres and all of those things, they add a level of pressure, I think, and a level of expectation and also a level of unreality that can make it, you know, more challenging, more confusing, more disappointing at times. So I think that like if you removing alcohol, asking for something simple like a coffee date or something like, I know that there's but there's some women that think that like that's a low value proposition, that you're like, if you're not investing in the date, then what's the point, you know? And so it's not a perfect strategy, but I think just being able to be clear-eyed and see the person in front of you and kind of have that conversation and see if there's chemistry without a whole bunch of outside factors like alcohol and, you know, and romantic setting and all of that is a really a good first filter. You know, if the person in the relationship passes that, I don't want to say hurdle, but kind of like, man, if you enjoy yourself in that situation, then I think it's always, there's something there, you know?
So. I think one thing that's been really helpful for me is taking a lot of very intentional, like planned out ownership of my story and really being comfortable withholding if I don't feel like I'm ready to share something with someone. So in the context of a first date, like kind of having a little bit of a bucket of things that I would be comfortable with a total stranger knowing about me, but not necessarily pushing too far beyond that. Because I think a real common thing, especially with app dating, is that you can have like an oversharing hangover, for lack of a better term. And that just doesn't always feel good. And then what if the person ghosts you and you've like shared something about you or your family or friends that you maybe just wish you hadn't put out into the world in that way? So again, like I think it's a balance, because there needs to be some tolerance for like exposing and taking a little bit of a risk and getting to know someone. But I think it's also completely acceptable if you sort of cascade up to that. So yeah, a little bit of intentional pace setting again.
Mine's pretty short and sweet. Something that's really helped me is the first date is just there to see if you want to go on a second date. Don't make it, like you said, you're on like a full dinner. Don't make it a whole night. It honestly, a 2-hour first date is long enough. And it's just enough information and kind of energy check to know, okay, I would set up another time to see this person. And like we said, we are all so busy. There's so much going on. To choose to go on a second date with someone is a really big deal. So that should be the purpose of that first date. Do I want to keep spending my time with this person again?
Yeah, I agree. And I think the expectation that sparks need to be flying on the first date to continue is just setting the date up to fail. Sometimes those fireworks are actually false cues to feeling anxious or feeling somehow jitters, and they're not actually a predictable or reliable read on how you're feeling about a person long term. So I absolutely agree with you, Tess. Like, is this person enough for a second date is a great framework to go into it with. And I've started to recommend Zoom or FaceTime calls before a first date as a little bit of a screener. Like, we're all busy. You have no idea who this person is, right? This question around safety, especially for women, like, it's nice to be able just to, even if it's 10 or 15 minutes, like, get a vibe check, see if you have at least some kind of connection, see if the person even looks like they match on their profile. And yes, it's a little awkward. Yes, like, you are kind of in this a little more formalized way of interacting, but I still think it's a great kind of way to say, do I even want to go on a date with this person?
That would definitely make me nervous, but that's great advice.
Yeah. And I know that just as a kind of on the other side of the equation, I know there's a lot of guys that don't like that.
Oh, there's a lot of people that don't like that. Yeah.
That they don't like the 15-minute thing, not because they're sociopaths or anything like that. They just like the awkwardness of it and the kind of the stilted of it. But I do think that if you do agree to go on it and there's something there, it's a good first step, step 1A,
One other thing that is coming to mind that it would be wonderful if everyone did this, but I think you can only take responsibility for you, is really communicating about how you handle things if you don't want to move forward with someone. So like, before you've even met, saying something like, I just want to let you know, I tend to be upfront about, whether or not I want to see you again after our first date. I'm going to be super honest. I just wanted you to know that I'm not going to ghost you. So, like, giving people a little bit of a heads up so that hopefully no one feels like they've been, completely dropped, because that's not a nice feeling. So I think, like, being respectful and giving people the kind of, etiquette and respect that you would want in return is a really lovely thing to do.
It's like a contract.
Yeah. And I think that's,
it feels so rigid, but
it's sorely lacking. I think there is no, the ethics of dating today, kind of preclude that. And I think that it's sorely lacking. I mean, there are no, for lack of, we used to call it good manners. There are no good manners anymore. People treat each other very poorly, and I think that doing something like that is a beautiful thing, and I think it's not just not for sure appreciated by the counterparty, but also just something that you can carry with yourself. Like, it's a really good orienting principle. And I really love it. Yeah.
Yeah. If you can ethically date, if you can kind of care for yourself and the other person in the process, it's also going to protect you from burnout. It's going to hold you in a kind of higher regard. Like, you're going to feel better in this process. So I love this idea. It's not just about the other person. It really is taking care of yourself too. Yeah.
And also, it's okay to, like, quote unquote, take care of a stranger. Like, we do that all the time out in the world. We don't just go through and, like, bulldoze everyone. So I think it's an honorable thing to do, to communicate and be clear about, what kind of your ethical guiding light is as you're dating.
And if it does work out after that, you've already set the scene for open, honest communication before you even met, which is pretty incredible.
You're setting yourself up well. So to wrap up this conversation, do you guys have any resources or just fun things you've consumed recently? Maybe it's a podcast, maybe it's a TV show that you just think would be helpful for people that are dating in New York?
Don't watch Sex in the City.
Don't watch Entourage.
Don't watch Entourage.
But it's amazing because it's amazing how, not amazing, but it's instructive how far we've come in the last 10, 15 years at Sex in the City and Entourage, which were, touchstones of exactly that kind of life. From, like, they're completely, almost totally irrelevant today. It's a very different dating world than it was even, 10 years ago.
I have a podcast that I recently discovered called Jillian on Love. She's a dating coach, but I just think she has a really grounded approach towards dating, and not just these superficial skills and tips, but also really kind of looking at yourself more deeply, thinking about what your values are, thinking about what makes for kind of a meaningful long-term relationship. And it doesn't have too much of a kind of pessimistic view of dating. There's like a lot of, I think, stuff that she frames as in our control. So that would be my recommendation.
Run club. Yeah,
Run club.
I'm telling you, run club. That's. But I do think that if you have that, I do think this idea that we spoke about, this idea of like, of clubs, because, we're best case scenario, you meet someone that you like. Worst case scenario, you're doing something that you love. Like, I think it's a really good idea. And I think that, we spend way too much time on our own in this city. Maybe that's the case everywhere, but like, so anything that forces us to be in contact with others, is just a good thing.
Another recommendation that I have is the Joy List, which is a listserv that every week the woman who runs the listserv will just send out a list of things to do in New York. And it's really catered toward people that are single, but it's also very much focused on deepening connections with other people, like how to create different kind of communities around meaningful connection. And just different things that people are hosting throughout the city. Like, I think that's what makes the city so special, is that there is just so many ways to meet people. You just have to do it. You just have to take the plunge and take the risk and do something.
I feel like it would be helpful to plug Hold Me Tight by Sue Johnson for this, just because not so much in the dating aspect, but if you're looking to actually get into a relationship through dating, understanding more about yourself and exploring those parts of you is really helpful from the get-go of a relationship.
Great book. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for this conversation. This was really fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. Thank you so much for doing this. And I feel like there's so much more that can be said, so much more that can be explored. There's a whole other thing about like dating with kids, and there's so many different things that we could be talking about. So I love that this was the first episode.
Great question.
Totally.